Hey everybody, Patti and I are here today with the Director of Business Development at accept.blue, Ben Frisch. How you doing today, Ben?
Good. Thank you so much, James, for having me.
Absolutely. So,
Great to have you.
yeah, I'm excited about this one. I've been wanting to do this interview for a while. I've been following accept.blue's progress, and I think it's always exciting as we get new companies in the payment space, especially when we get new companies that are not, eliminating the ISOs and agents that are actually like in partnership with them. And that's certainly the case with accept.blue. So the main topic today, other than introducing accept.blue to our audience, Ben, is we're going to dive into these recent integrations you've done with Salesforce and NetSuite. Which I know you guys are really excited about. I think it's an amazing opportunity for our audience to target literally tens of thousands of merchants that they otherwise probably would not get. But before we dive into that, Ben, give us a little bit of your background, your journey, and then tell us about accept.blue, just in broad terms. What is it and what do you guys do?
Sure. So first of all, thank you so much, James and Patty, for having me. I'm really excited about this. I'm really into the content that you guys create. And James, one of the things that I feel like our industry is really missing is education. There's so much out there. There's so much knowledge that ISOs and agents need to have. And besides for you and some other couple of folks out there isn't that much education. So I'm a big fan of this
Thank you.
This podcast and the
Thank you.
content that you create for sure. So yeah, let me tell you a little bit about accept.blue. So we're a processor agnostic gateway, and when I say processor agnostic, processor is like a word that I sort of feel like everybody has a different definition of. Everybody calls something else processor, right? So we're processor agnostic as far as first data thesis Alabama processors, but we're also processor agnostic as ISO agnostic. That means we work directly with ISOs. We don't work directly with merchants. We service ISOs. That's who our partners are. And we're open to all ISOs as long as they're working with our processors, first data and thesis. So a little bit about accept.blue. So we're fairly new. I like to say we're the new kid on the block, but we're the cool new kid on the block. So it's not that big of a problem. So we actually started off, our beginnings were at a software development firm, a small company that was doing custom software development. And what we started realizing was that with every software that we were building or managing, there was always that payment piece that came into play.
Yeah,
and more often than not, that was one of the more complicated pieces to implement. And we realized that the options out there, the older gateways or the older platforms weren't always easy to connect to and to integrate with, and they were very slow on implementing certain features or solutions that would enable softwares to really put that payment space in. And the more we thought about it and spoke about it, the more we realized that there's a real void in the market for payment platform, and specifically in the B2B and business to government industries. That's where it seems to be the largest void and the biggest the biggest space for us to come in. So we set about building accept.blue. It took us a couple of years, but we finally reached the point where we were confident enough to sell. 2020 was actually our first full year of sales. So it's probably
baptism by fire.
Exactly. It was like if there was any year to launch, it was going to be 2020, right? But it's been a good year. A lot of businesses, especially card present businesses, had a really hard time. But thankfully, because we're mostly focused on card not present, the hit wasn't as hard. We were able to really get our product out there and start sales. Yeah. So in a nutshell, that's pretty much accept.blue.
I have a quick question, if you don't mind, Ben. The name, accept.blue. What is there a significance there? I mean, I have to admit, when I first saw it, it was like, I wonder if this is Amex. I don't know why. I just,
No, their colors are blue.
Their colors are blue, right? Yeah. So.
For sure, right? So actually, you're not the first one to say, wait, so you guys are part of American Express or not? I mean, it is a little bit confusing. There really isn't that much, depth to the name. It's more of accept, meaning we're accepting payments, we're allowing, payments to be accepted. Software company that we were working with in the past was Code Blue, so we sort of broke off of that and used the words accept.blue.
Okay.
But then, there's not much of a, philosophical story behind it.
Yeah.
Definitely not aligned with Amex though. Okay.
Right.
That's right.
It'll make it a little easier for you guys if someday you get acquired by Amex, and then you're all set. You know? They'll be
Yeah,
like, they don't even
right?
change the name. So,
Right.
awesome. You know, one other follow up to that too, I had, you know, I kind of compare you guys in some ways to Stripe. I don't know if that's an accurate comparison, but it's just as far as your go to market. I know you guys have a lot of other things with the optimization and all of that. But how do you know, Stripe is obviously like the enemy of our industry in a lot of ways. When I say our industry, I mean the direct merchant sales organizations. How do you compare yourself when you look at somebody like a Stripe? Obviously, they've been around a long time, but do you feel like you're kind of solving some similar problems in terms of ISV integration and stuff?
So I'm really happy you asked that question. One of the mottos we have with our development team when it comes to the API is simpler than Stripe. That's like been sort of our slogan.
I kind
And
of figured that. I could
yeah,
tell.
so
I could tell just by seeing what you guys were doing. It's like a lot of the bigger gateways in our industry that are fantastic, and I love them, but they, you know, they're not quite there. The API side. I mean, you know, if you're I'm a developer by background as well, and so like when you actually integrate with Stripe and then you integrate with somebody else, you know, you're like, wow. I mean, they're getting better, but man, there's definitely a gap there for sure. It's harder.
For sure. And we, you know, we focus on the virtual terminal, you know, our core product, but at the same time, we place an immense focus on the API because we know that that's where the future is, right?
Yes.
You know, at the end of the day, if you don't have a clean, simple, open API, you know, you're not set for tomorrow, right?
Right.
And another thing we did was that our product is a fully white labeled product, which means every ISO gets the product branded to them. So we branded the API as well. So if you're an ISO accept.blue, your API documentation is actually branded to your company because we want API to be a really a leveraged part of our solution.
That's really cool. I didn't know that you actually white label the API. It's pretty sweet. So yeah, I think that's an interesting way to, you know, a lot of people are like, well, there's so many gateways. Where does accept.blue fit into the ecosystem? And at least for me, when I talk about you guys with ISOs, it's like, well, if you have a software company that's saying we want to use Stripe because it's so simple that even though we're not making any rev share, it's worth it because of the savings on developer time. I think that's kind of the accept.blue spot. So anyway, so let's dive into our topic today. So I really like this. I was excited to see that you guys had done these integrations. So let's start by just kind of giving us a little bit of scope. So Salesforce and NetSuite, these are like humongous companies, but our industry may not be as familiar with them as you and I are, Ben. So can you give us a little concept of this opportunity of merchants and businesses that work with Salesforce? Do you have any numbers, any stats? Give us a little bit of information about those companies.
For sure. So NetSuite is an enterprise resource planning software, or better known as an ERP software. And Salesforce is a customer relation management or CRM software. And, you know, really simply what these are softwares that larger companies or organizations rely on to run their business, right? You know, different industries use different softwares. Salesforce is used a lot by the nonprofit world, but for the most part, the common denominator here is that if you're a larger organization or a large business and there's too many pieces, you know, there's too many pieces going around your company, you have the software that sort of enables you to manage everything from one portal, from one admin, you know, and makes life a lot easier for these organizations. So because these are primarily much larger companies that are using these softwares, and we're talking about a minimum of, you know, 100,000 a month, and sometimes it's millions of dollars a month in processing. This is obviously, you know, the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow for ISOs, you know, and agents. And the thing with these companies is that they both are really incredible pieces of software, but when it comes to payments, they rely on you know, another party being integrated to the software to allow these businesses to process payments within this software. And that's where accept.blue comes into the picture, where we created these plugins that allows businesses and organizations that are using these softwares to process payments within these softwares, you know, so everything is really in one place.
Yeah. So you talked about the size of these organizations being larger. And I know, and of course, I mean, Salesforce, you know, there's individuals that use Salesforce, but I think to your point, as far as payment integrations, the bigger companies is where a lot of the opportunity is. Talk about the type a little bit. You mentioned nonprofit with Salesforce. Do these companies tend to be towards maybe card not present, or is there anything there? Or is it just kind of like, if you're large, you might use Salesforce? I mean, does it matter about the type?
Right. So, there are both card not present and card present organizations that use these softwares. Um, but primarily, I would say the overwhelming majority would be card not present. Because for the
Yeah.
most part, we're talking about, let's say with NetSuite, there are 40,000 companies that use NetSuite today. And for the most part, we're talking about actually 150,000 that use Salesforce. So we're talking about a lot of these are really, really
Right.
big.
There's like
And
200,
popular
there's like
softwares.
200,000 companies that are
Exactly.
using one of
Exactly.
these two platforms. Yeah.
Yeah, that's 200,000
Wow.
opportunities, for ISOs out there.
So,
Um,
and I'm sorry to cut you off there, but okay, so we have these 200,000 companies. I want to talk about this word native for a second. So
Yeah,
this,
yeah.
these are native integrations. So explain to us, if I'm a large company and I want to accept payments and I'm using a different gateway that's not native, what does that mean? Why is that different from the native integration that accept.blue has done?
Great question. When it comes to the word native, I like to say there's two parts to the native, to the nativity of this integration. And one is that payments are actually taking place within NetSuite or within Salesforce. So with a non-native integration, what you might see is a sort of a pop-up window that appears,
Right.
when the business is trying to process payments, or a redirect to a different page or a different website where they might have the information, transferred over, but at the same time, we're talking about another party coming into play over here, because it's not happening actually within the NetSuite or Salesforce
Right. Okay.
software. While with accept.blue, there's no pop-ups, there's no redirects, there's no links to it, there's nothing. It's actually built in as part of the NetSuite account. So you have, your saved
Right.
cards and your customers and the ability to just process payments with the click of a button. So that's part one of native. Part two, which is equally as important, is the fact that we allow the ISO to handle the relationship. So, with some other native payment plugins out there, what happens is that the gateway will say, we need to deal with the merchants directly. We don't want the ISO coming in because, these softwares could very often get complicated and with specific customizations and things like that. And they say, we don't need you, the ISO in the picture or the agent in the picture. We'll just talk to the merchant. But with accept.blue, because it's our proprietary gateway and we service ISOs, that's who we service. We're more than happy for the ISO to handle the relationship. And as James and Patti, both of you know that ISOs, it's so important for them to handle the relationship, for them to stay
Right.
in the picture at all times.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. It's really interesting too, because, I know exactly what you mean about this native thing. It is very jarring when, and like even stuff like just making sure the data is there. I've seen integrations where you're like, accept a payment. It takes you to another gateway landing page, basically. The customer makes the payment, they click and it's approved. And many times it leaves you on that other screen and says
Right.
payment approved. And it's like, okay,
Where
well
do I
now
go
what?
from here?
So now you go back to your other tab and nothing changed. So what do? Do
Yeah.
you then have to make a checkbox that says it was paid? Like that doesn't make any sense. Whereas what you guys are doing, if I'm understanding it correctly, it would be like within Salesforce, it says payment accepted, and
Right.
here's the date it was accepted, here's the transaction information. And so it's like all there in that system. And that's really important because when you get a customer that calls in and says, hey, I made a, my account says I'm in arrears in payments, but I actually made a payment last month, and your customer service person actually goes and looks at it, they don't really know if you did. They then have to go back into the gateway, try
Right.
to find this transaction, see the date on it, see if it matches the invoice number. And, it's like, it gets very, very confusing. So I think, having it native is just really, really crucial. And so let's talk about Salesforce for just a second. So I used Salesforce for my company a long time ago, and I had an ISO of my own that was pretty large. And I'm not a huge Salesforce fan, but I understand why larger organizations use it. It does pull things together. So let's get a little more specific. Let's talk about a card not present merchant that's invoicing, customers. Okay. So maybe they're doing large ticket and they're invoicing, maybe it's a B2B type client. They're invoicing their customers. What does that transaction flow look like inside of Salesforce if they use the accept.blue integration?
Right. So when it comes to Salesforce, you mentioned an example of sending out an invoice. A lot of people that use Salesforce are relying on recurring payments.
Yes.
I mentioned, nonprofits, that have donors that have just, recurring payments for a nonprofit. someone who sets up a recurring payment is the absolute best, right? Because they're not, the payments are just coming in month after month or week after week. So, the process would be pretty simple of selecting a customer, adding a card, saving a card to that customer's profile, and that card is tokenized because it's going through the gateway, and we rely on tokenization. And then just setting up that, that recurring payment to just run automatically. And that would update Salesforce in real time and the gateway, the virtual terminal, the reporting in the gateway. At the same time, these two softwares would be talking to each other, are completely synced. And the same thing happens, with sending out an invoice and the customer paying. Everything would be appearing both in Salesforce and at the gateway in real time and keeping everything updated.
In real time and simultaneously, right? It's
right.
not like there's a lag between. Gotcha.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. So, so let's pivot to NetSuite. So maybe a good example here would be more of the invoicing, I would think, with NetSuite. Let's talk about merchants specifically that maybe do level 3 processing, which we haven't talked a lot about on this podcast. We've covered a few things here and there about optimization, but let's say we have a government contractor. So as an example, I used to have a client that was really large, and their job was they fixed all of the mail trucks. So all the trucks that, deliver the mail and things like that, they would go to this kind of regional auto repair place. And so this place was billing the government, and the government was paying with government issued credit cards. Okay. So let's say that example, let's say that merchant is using NetSuite. Can you give us a little flavor of how that would work as far as how they'd be collecting money and potentially this level 3 data that they need?
For sure. So I'm really happy you brought up, level 3, you guys are the expert on level 3, and a big part of accept.blue is interchange optimization, and the fact that we automate that level 3. So again, we weren't trying to really change anything with the NetSuite or Salesforce for that matter. We're just trying to enable them to accept payments. So an example would be a merchant creates a sales order, which is considered an authorization. Again, they would have customers saved in file with saved cards, and they would, process the payments, either a sales order or cash sale. And then when it comes to level 3, that actually takes place completely on the back end. So the merchant is not faced with any additional data fields that they have to input. They're just putting in the, the credit card number and the zip and processing that payment. And then on the back end, what accept.blue is doing is sending all that additional data, to the processor. So it's really, any software that's going to leverage accept.blue's API, be it NetSuite, Salesforce, QuickBooks, whatever it is. One of the major benefits is that these transactions, if they're qualifying transactions, and in your scenario, that would be a prime example of a business that would, qualify a lot for interchange optimization. This is all happening on the back end without the merchant having to do any, additional work or putting in any additional information.
So that additional information basically is being populated from NetSuite, from what's already on NetSuite. Is that what you're saying?
So we take whatever information we have on NetSuite, whatever information is provided, we'll grab that. Whatever is missing, we'll provide on the back end, default information or template information as the ISO set up this merchant. But
Gotcha.
we're going to combine this information to create this complete set of level 2 and 3 data and send that off with the transaction. Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm going to throw you a little bit of a curveball question, and it's fine if, I know you're probably not the in-house expert on level 3 and all that. So, this may be outside of the wheelhouse, but I'm just kind of curious. So with level 3, there's a lot of data that's required. And it's pretty specific data, and it's data that's required by the government in order to, process transactions and then to be able to get this lower rate by the card brands. When you say you're pre-populating, I'm just curious, how do you decide how far to push that envelope? Ultimately, you don't want to provide, bogus information, for lack of a better word. It does need to be legit. So any thoughts on that, is just kind of in general of how far you push that envelope to make it like this quote unquote fully automated versus actually getting the data from the merchant?
So, and James, I get this question probably on a daily basis at this point.
We're good. So you're ready to answer it.
Level 3,
so you know the answer, right? You don't have to search for it.
Right. So let me tell you a little bit of how accept.blue does interchange optimization, and it might be a little bit different than some other platforms out there. So when an ISO boards a merchant to the gateway, there's going to be a tab level 3, and what we're going to do is we're going to ask the ISO for some industry specific level 2 and 3 data. Besides for, let's say, a tax rate based on the merchant's locality, but we're going to tell the ISO, we're going to recommend of the ISO to ask the merchant for a set of information that's that's relevant to this merchant. So let's take an example. Let's take let's take a simple example, a plumber, right? They have one product. They have many products that they sell, right? But they can for sure provide SKU, a product reference number, description, a name, a commodity code for at least one of their products, right? They could probably do for many of the products, but we just asked them, get one set of information from this merchant and plug it into this merchant's profile. And now so it's not just sort of dummy data that's just being sent the same for every merchant across this ISO's portfolio. Instead, we're actually getting industry-specific level 2 and 3 data that becomes the template for this merchant's transactions. And we're going to take that, and obviously there's going to be some default information that we're going to provide on the back end. And a lot of it, is really sort of, it could be defaulted, but whatever could be specific to this merchant's business, to this merchant's industry, we give the ISO the ability to actually set that information as part of this merchant's profile so that we could take this fully specific, industry-specific template and send it along with every transaction. So, to answer your question, yes, some of it is, default data that, technically could be sent across all merchants, but we do try to have level 2 and 3 data be specific to each merchant's, file.
Yeah, I think to me, it's a really interesting debate. I was talking to another company about it recently, and we were just debating. And I mean, I think it will be interesting to see how that develops from the issuing. Obviously the issuing banks hate this. Like, you know what I mean? This is like now very, I mean, it's not like you guys are the first to try to automate. I think you're pushing the envelope further, and I love what you're doing is setting up the profiles and trying to make it as specific as you can. I will be very interested to see. It's like you guys are absolutely playing by the existing rules. I wonder if 2 years from now those rules will change. I really do. These issuing banks are losing millions of dollars a day as a result of companies like yours. And I think it's great. I love it. I think they should lose millions of dollars a day because these merchants deserve to get lower rates. But at the same time, I wonder if they're eventually going to come back and say, this has got to be like actual legit. But I think even in that case, you guys have an advantage because having your NetSuite integration, that is where that data is going to live for these companies. And I mean, yeah. So, so I think it's super interesting. Okay. So let's shift gears a little bit. I think our audience has at least a cursory understanding of this, native integration. And so I think that's interesting. Is there anything you would add to this before we dive into kind of more of the sales side a little bit? Is there anything that you would add in that you feel like the NetSuite and Salesforce integrations, is there anything about them that sets them apart from other companies that have tried to integrate that you find is like a real advantage to these business clients? Anything else you kind of want to add to that?
And perhaps maybe what the difference between each of them, if there's any distinctiveness that sets them apart from each other. I mean, it seems not to, but I'm just going to throw that out there.
Right. So, sure. So, NetSuite is primarily used by, manufacturers, wholesalers, businesses like that. Whereas Salesforce could be used by organizations that talk directly to customers. They're not necessarily business to business. They could be a B2C company as well, and even private individuals, like you mentioned. So, NetSuite is going to be used by, you'll almost never ever find a small company using NetSuite. I mean, that would be, that would be very rare. And it's not so the case with Salesforce. So there are certain differences, but the key thing that I think about both of these softwares and why I think it's such a valuable plugin and such a big deal for ISOs out there is because when you get such a client, when you get a NetSuite client, we're talking about, a volume of transactions that is easily the size of, 4 or 5 smaller, smaller merchants. And, sort of the smaller merchants are the low-hanging fruit, and it might be tempting to run after them. And there's nothing wrong with running after, the nail salon down the block. I'm not saying those aren't good merchants, but if you sort of focus on the larger merchants, I think there's so many benefits. And besides the actual profits that are available with these larger merchants, I think there's one other point, and that's stickiness, right?
Right.
When you sign up this nail salon, down the block, all it takes is another agent with a couple of basis points off to come and say, listen, switch to me. I'll give you the same service with a little bit of a lower rate. And that happens. There's probably statistics on the retention rate with with merchants, smaller merchants, but I'm pretty convinced that with these larger merchants, it doesn't really work like that. To get them to switch their payment partner is a big deal, and they're not going to do it so fast. So if you can come there and tell them, listen, we're going to give you payment processing within the software that you use at a good rate with interchange optimization, you can be pretty assured that this is a relationship that's going to stay for a long time, and it's going to take a lot, to shake that partnership.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Do you have any ideas, Ben, about what advice you might give to ISOs who want to target any of these businesses? Are there specific places where they can go, or other ideas that they can leverage to start building a book of business in this space? I mean, because it seems, as you say, it's extremely lucrative. If I was out there, I'd be jotting down this stuff right now and going for it. But where would they go?
Right. So that's a great question, and one I've been getting ever since we rolled out this integration. How do I get these merchants? Right. I get it. I get the opportunity. How do we actually get them?
Yeah.
And the truth is there isn't some secret website that's going to list all these NetSuite companies or anything like that.
Right.
But what I do tell these ISOs is that it's all in how you set yourself up. Who you're going to be targeting. Your mindset. I was talking to a certain ISO, and the ISO mentioned that what they've just done was sort of take off commissions or roll back commissions on any businesses that are processing less than $100,000 a month. And I'm not saying that's good advice for every ISO office, but the point is we're gonna pivot these agents to really focus on these larger merchants. And when you start looking for them, you will find them. When you start focusing on larger opportunities, on manufacturers and wholesalers, then instead of noticing the small shop down the block, you start noticing the factory a couple of blocks away, and this larger corporation a few miles out of your city, and that's where your focus starts to be, and eventually you definitely will hit these companies that are using NetSuite and Salesforce,
Right.
and you can come to them and tell them, listen, I've got the complete solution for you. Right.
I would also think go ahead.
No, go ahead, Patti.
Okay. I would also think that office buildings. I was talking to a friend the other day, and he was explaining how he was in a building that was 17 floors, right? He's a stockbroker, but there's all these types of big, or at least mid-sized businesses, mid-sized to larger businesses. I would think that would be, just in my mind, it'd be like, hey, let's go to a couple of these buildings and start looking at the directory and see,
Yep.
right?
Absolutely.
Well, you know what, Ben, I'll give our audience an idea right now of exactly how you could target them. So I know exactly what I would do if I still had an ISO and I partnered with you guys and wanted to go after these NetSuite merchants. The beauty of our economy today is social media. These companies may not have published a list, but it's the same thing. And so what I would do is I would write a short little ebook or a short little guide of, optimized payments with NetSuite would be the title. Create your ebook, create your graphic, go to the Facebook advertising platform and run an ad for that as a free download where you get name, email, phone number. And in the interest section, just put the word NetSuite. And what that's going to do is that's going to target anybody on Facebook that has liked the NetSuite page, has interacted with NetSuite, has talked about NetSuite. And so Facebook is very good at that. Even, have they visited the NetSuite website? Because I guarantee you NetSuite is using Facebook pixels. And so the great thing about it is these companies, these social media companies make it super, super easy. So if you want to make $100,000 a year extra in the next 6 months, take that idea I just gave you, and the first one that runs with it is going to make a ton of money. So I think there's absolutely ways to target these businesses. Another really interesting one would be Salesforce, would be really the exact same thing. Salesforce does an amazing job of getting their clients to engage with them on social media. That is one of their hallmarks. So leverage that to your advantage. Go to these different platforms and say, run an ad on, how to optimize payments with Salesforce or enterprise payment solutions for Salesforce. The key, 3 keys to enterprise, whatever. And so come up with a sexy title, get a good graphic designer from, Upwork.com or something, and make a cool little ad, a free download or something. And man, you could absolutely just kill it in this space. So so I love what you guys are doing. So Ben, let's close it out with this. I know we could keep talking for a long time. I'd love to talk to you more about level 3. We'll have to do another episode at some point about that. But tell us about where people can go to learn more. I'm sure we'll have a lot of ISOs and agents that are interested in partnering with accept.blue. So where would you send them to learn more?
Sure. So our website is always a great first step. It's accept.blue. There's no .com. That's a common mistake. It's just accept.blue. You can fill out the the contact form there, and we respond usually within a couple of hours to every information request.
Awesome.
Well, that
That's great.
explains it, because I tried to do acceptblue.com and got some very strange site.
Yeah, I don't think we were thinking of that when we actually decided on accept.blue.
You thought accept.blue would be so cool. Everybody would remember.
Right, sure.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, I made that mistake with, I can't remember what it was, some business I had a while back, and eventually everybody figures it out, but it takes a little while to get it across. So
Right.
Ben, thank you so much for your time today, the information, the insights. I know for sure a lot of people in our audience are already salivating over some of these things and are going to be reaching out to you guys, and hope you guys get a big bump from it. So thanks again for taking the time and sharing the info with us.
Yeah, thanks
Thank
again.
you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Ben. I actually learned a lot from this. Thank you.
That's cool. It's been a real pleasure, both James and Patty, to be here. I'm, really excited to have been able to convey so much valuable information. Like I said, I think you guys are doing a great job, educating ISOs and agents out there. So thank you very much.
Thank you.